friends, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Midweek Message. I'm Brother Wayne, and I'm glad that you're here with me today. We're going to be in Psalm chapter 4, so go ahead and take out your Bibles, turn to Psalm chapter 4, and we'll jump into that in just a little while. Today we're talking about, in general, the topic of antagonists. I don't know if you've ever had an antagonist in your life, or if you even know what an antagonist is. I know that I've had some in my life, and they can make your life pretty miserable. And I believe that David was dealing with some antagonism and some antagonists in his life, and that's what led to the writing of the fourth Psalm. First of all, let's start with talking about what an antagonist is. You can find a definition for this word almost anywhere, but dictionary.com says that an antagonist is a person who is opposed to, struggles against, or competes with another, an opponent or an adversary. Okay, so a few years back, I came across a really neat book that has really just changed the way that I've come to think about antagonism and antagonists and really even relationships in general, because if you've spent any time in leadership, whether it's in the church or outside the church, you have some people in your life probably who have opposed you or have been your opponent. And now I'm not talking about people who just have a difference of opinion with you on a certain subject, okay? Antagonist isn't somebody who necessarily disagrees with you. It's someone who opposes you. And opposition so often happens at a personal level. So you can disagree over issues and topics and still at a personal level be able to relate to one another in a very positive way. But people who are antagonists have an inability to relate to people that they disagree with in any way other than a negative way. Now, they may come across to your face as a friend or as someone that you can trust, but then often behind your back or when you're not around, they are showing their opposition to you. Now, this book that I came across is called Antagonists in the Church, and it's by Kenneth Hoke. It's a really good book. If you are a member of a church, I recommend that you read it. If you are a pastor in a church, this is a must read. If you are in leadership in any fashion in the church, then this is a good read for you as well. Whether you're like a deacon or a Sunday school teacher, maybe an elder, maybe you're support staff, or you are, a staff member at a church, this book is a must read for anybody in leadership in the church. And I would suggest that even though this book is written specifically for the church, you can learn a lot from this book that can be applied outside the church in the professional world or in the public setting as well. So there's lots of great practical tips and ideas on how to deal with antagonists. So I want to read to you a quote from this book that I believe gives us a little bit better picture of who antagonists are. Hoke says, antagonists are not just misguided or misunderstood. They are out to hurt people, and they do. They leave a trail of broken lives. People are wounded and discouraged. Antagonists are bullies. Antagonists can shatter a sense of the presence of God's love in individuals and in a faith community. So again, this idea of antagonism. Antagonists attack us, but they rarely come at us with a full frontal attack, because for the most part, antagonists are cowards. They don't want to deal with issues in a head-on way. They don't want to sit at the table and just put their cards out and deal with issues, because there's something inside of them that's kind of broken when it comes to relational things. And so they don't value the relationship as much as they value their issues or their agenda or their opinion. And so the two primary places, I guess you could say, that antagonists attack us or when we're not around. Because, like I said earlier, a lot of times when you're around them, they'll treat you like they're your friend, or they even agree with you. But when you leave their presence and they're in the presence of other people, they start to work to undermine your leadership, or to discredit you, or to slander your character, because what they're trying to do is to erode your leadership base, or to erode your influence over other people, because they're trying to claim that for themselves. And so they'll attack you behind your back. That's the primary way they attack us. But then there's a secondary way that I believe antagonists attack us as well, and they don't even necessarily mean to do this, it just happens, and that is when we're lying in bed at night. I don't know if you've ever had somebody come to you and say, hey, look, I just want to tell you the rumors that are going around about you. I want to tell you what I've heard. They say this, or I heard them talk about this, or they came to me and told me this about you, or listen, I've really had some people who are complaining and they won't come to you, but they came to me. Now, I've had this happen to me in the past in leadership, and one of the things that I learned from this book, one of the things that I've just learned from leadership, is anytime somebody comes to me with a they or a them, I ask them to identify who they and them are. Because here's just a principle that you need to get into your head. It will help you a lot in life. Unless they or them have a face or a name, they or them usually don't exist. Now, a lot of times, I've had people come to me and say, they said this, or I heard them say this, and I'll say, well, who are they? And this person will say to me, well, I really can't tell you who they are. It was told to me in confidence, and blah, blah, blah. Or, I really don't want to let that information out. Well, there's one or two things going on. Either they or them don't really exist, or they or them is really only one or two people when this person wants you to think that they are a vast number of people, or, and this is most likely the case, they or them is the person who's actually talking to you. Like I said, antagonists are cowards. They don't want to come clean about, hey, this is the way that I feel. They don't know how to deal with conflict. And so what they do is they try to put their ideas and their thoughts, they try to transpose them onto other people and bring that information to you as if it's other people that feel that way, but they themselves, they've got your back. They've got your best interest at heart. The truth of the matter is, most of the time, it's the person that's talking to you that feels the way that they're saying other people feel. So that's important to remember. But here's what happens when we hear they and them a lot. We lie in bed at night and we wonder who they are. We wonder if they are right. We wonder how many of them there is. And we argue with them in our mind. We think we have imaginary conversations. We remember things that have been told to us, and we blow things out of proportion. And when we think about that antagonist, maybe we've had a confrontation, and we think about that confrontation and how we could have done it differently, how we could have handled things better. And we can't go to sleep because we're replaying these things over and over and over in our minds. And I believe that this is exactly the situation that David found himself in. He had some antagonists who were opposed to his leadership and who were trying to undermine him. And he's lying here in bed and he's thinking about these things. As a matter of fact, this psalm is entitled A Night Prayer. So David is laying in his bed, I believe, and he's thinking about these things, and he does the only thing that he knows to do to deal with this antagonism. He takes it to God. And so I believe we get a really good example here about how you and I should begin the process of dealing with antagonists and antagonism in our lives. Okay? So we're going to work through this psalm, and we're going to talk about a few things here and there as we go. The first thing that I'd point out to you in this psalm is David's appeal. the appeal. Okay, look at what he says in verse 1. He says, "Answer me when I call, God who vindicates me. You freed me from affliction. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer." Notice that the first thing he does is he appeals to God for an answer. God, please answer me. Please listen to me. And he identifies God as the God who vindicates him. Now, what kind of people need vindication? It's people who have been wrongly accused of something, or it's people who have been punished for something that they didn't do. I remember growing up in school, maybe there would be 2 or 3 kids in the class who were cutting up, acting bad, talking, whatever, and the teacher would punish the whole class because of it. And man, that used to make me so angry that I got punished and I was being good. I was doing the right thing, and yet I got the same punishment as these other guys. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt like it was unfair. And or there have been times in my life where I've been blamed for things. I've had things laid at my feet, as maybe being in the ministry, that and blamed on me that I was not responsible for. Things that I didn't have anything to do with, and yet it was maybe I was accused of something, of some type of wrongdoing, or maybe somebody wanted to lay some blame on me that actually belonged somewhere else, and I would be angry about that. I would feel like God vindicate me, Lord, show me to be a man of integrity and character and honor, and bring all of these other people to their knees before you, God, and help them know that they're wrong. And I think that's what David is saying. God, vindicate me. And he remembers, as part of this appeal, that God has done this in the past. He says, "You freed me from affliction." He remembers God's faithfulness to him in the past, and that God has always carried him through and carried him along. And he says, based on that, be gracious to me and hear my prayer. I think David knew that God was on his side, and that David could expect God's help. Okay? He knew that. He knew he was God's chosen king, and that God had put him in place to lead the nation of Israel. Yet, nevertheless, David prayed and appealed to God. Listen, I think that something happens when we carry things to God in prayer. I know a lot of people are like, God is sovereign, God's powerful, God's in control. Why do I need to ask him to do something? I mean, he's going to do what he's going to do anyway. Listen, something happens in prayer. When I take something to God, something that's a burden for me, or maybe something that's got me under some type of bondage, or something that is weighing heavily upon me, when I voice it to God in prayer, it loses its grip on me. It loses its hold on me. It loses its power over me when I voice it to God in prayer, when I give it to him in prayer. And I believe that's what David is doing here. He knows that God's going to work in his situation and is going to guide him and going to guard him, going to give him good things. He knows that's going to happen because that's how God's operated in the past. And yet he is appealing to God anyway, because he knows that by bringing it to God, it allows him to let go of it. Okay? So then David kind of breaks in the middle of this vertical thing that's going on between him and God, and he starts talking about these antagonists. And he begins by addressing these antagonists, and then giving some characteristics of the kind of people they are. And he says, "How long, exalted ones, will my honor be insulted?" I kind of get this feeling like, have you ever had conversations with people who are antagonists in your life, even though they're not in the room? It's like you're in your mind, maybe you're talking to them, you're arguing with them, you're saying, "Hey, why are you doing this? How can you possibly think that way?" I feel like that's what David's doing here. He says, "How long, exalted ones, will my honor be insulted? How long will you love what is worthless and pursue a lie?" So we know that these antagonists were people who had some degree of power or prestige, because David addresses them as exalted ones. And so you don't know if these were like some powerfully elite people, or they were rich people, or other leaders, but David is addressing them. And we know that they had insulted David's honor because he says, how long will my honor be insulted? So these people had been doing this for an extended amount of time. This reminds me of the rumor mill. So the rumor mill had been going, and somebody was producing these rumors, and then these rumors were spreading, and it is insulting David's honor. They're tearing him down. They're eroding his character base and trying to slander him and really make him look bad. And we know also that they had competing values and opposing priorities from David, because he says, how long will you love what is worthless? So the things that they were wanting to pursue were worthless. And how long will you pursue a lie? Now, we don't know when it comes to this lie. We don't know if maybe they had bought into a lie that was personally about David, and now they were pursuing it. Like they were spreading this rumor. They were trying to discredit him and make him look bad. We don't know if maybe somebody had told a lie and everybody was buying into it and pursuing it. Or this is quite possibly what's going on, because this would tie back to insulting his honor. We don't know if they wanted David to lead in a certain direction, and maybe David wouldn't go that way because he knew that wasn't God's will and that it would be a worthless pursuit. And so now they're opposing David, and they're trying to get people to follow them, rather than him, and they're really trying to steal his leadership capability away from him. And we don't know if maybe there was some kind of competition for leadership. You remember this happened with Absalom and David, where Absalom tried to steal David's throne. Maybe somebody's trying to rise up and oppose David's leadership or his right to be in leadership, and these people are supporting that. We don't really know what's going on exactly, but we do know this. Whatever is happening, it's insulting to David's honor, and it's worthless, and that means it's godless. That means it's not according to God's will, and it's a lie. It's not the truth. And so David identifies who these antagonists are and what they're doing. Then notice the advice that David gives these antagonists. Again, David is these antagonists aren't in the room, I don't think. David's kind of having this conversation. It's between him and God and these people that aren't even there. But look at the advice that he offers them. He says, know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for himself. Now, who's David talking about here? Obviously, he's talking about himself. He's the faithful one. The Lord will hear when I call to him. In other words, look, God's going to listen to me, and he's not going to listen to y'all. Be angry and do not sin. Reflect in your heart while on your bed and be silent. Offer sacrifices in righteousness and trust in the Lord. So the first thing that he tells them is, hey, first, realize that God takes supreme interest in his people, and that he both guides and guards their way. And guess what? I'm one of his people. So God is on my side in all of this, and you need to recognize that, okay? And I remember when I was a kid, I'd get into arguments with like my cousins and stuff like that, or my friends. And we used to get into the my daddy is bigger than and tougher than your daddy argument. And I remember, man, getting into an argument with my cousin one time, and my cousin was like, my dad would beat your dad up. And I'm like, oh yeah? Well, my dad's got a knife. My dad would cut your dad. And then my cousin was like, well, my dad's got an axe. He'll chop your dad up with his axe. And I'd be like, well, my dad's got a gun. Your dad can't even get close to him with his axe. And we'd go back and forth trying to prove whose dad was bigger and whose dad was stronger and whose dad was tougher and meaner and better and whose dad was going to protect their kid the best. And I kind of feel like in a little way, this is what's happening here with David, is David's going, look, God's on my side. You can rail and you can try to create all the problems you want to create. But in the end, I'm going to win. Why? Because my dad is bigger than your dad. God is on my side. So he says, recognize that God's on my side. And he says, and you need to control yourself. Obviously, these people had gotten a little bit out of control. Because notice what he says, be angry and do not sin. And he says, reflect in your heart while on your bed and be silent. In other words, think about what you're doing, okay? And don't lose your temper. Don't lose control. Don't do things that you shouldn't be doing. Don't burn bridges that you might need to cross later. And I think what David is saying here is, look, it's okay for you to disagree with me, but it's not okay for you to be ugly. Our pastor's wife in our last church used to tell her children all the time, now act pretty, right? And the idea is don't act ugly, act pretty, be pretty. And so David is saying, don't be ugly. Well, you can be upset, you can be angry, but you don't have to be ugly. I remember when I was a young man in ministry, at my first full-time position, right out of seminary, I thought I knew everything, and I was on staff, and of course there was there's a certain degree of decorum that you're expected to have when you're a minister. And I showed up one day to work in blue jeans with my button up, like my shirt untucked. I was just kind of being sloppy that day. And I remember the senior pastor said, hey, go in there and tuck your shirt in. And I remember looking at him kind of rebelliously and a little bit of anger, and go, like, are you serious? And he goes, yeah, I'm serious. Go in there and tuck your shirt in. We don't dress like that around here. And I said, well, I disagree. And he says, well, you have the right to disagree, but you don't have the right to disobey. And so I went in there and I tucked my shirt in and learned a little bit of humility. And I think that's what David is saying here is, hey, you need a little bit of humility. You have the right to disagree with me. You don't necessarily have the right to disobey or to challenge my leadership or to go against what God has led me as the leader of this nation to do. So he says, be angry, but don't sin. Hey, don't slander, don't stir up dissension, don't create problems. Just deal with it, quietly. Come to me. Like, let's handle things the way that they're supposed to be handled with, and think about what you're doing. And then the last thing he says is get right with God. I stopped before I got here a little while ago, but verse 5 says, offer sacrifices in righteousness and trust in the Lord. Offer sacrifices in righteousness and trust in the Lord. In other words, go worship God, pray, offer sacrifices, worship, and then trust in the Lord. Because right now, you're trusting in something that's worthless. You're trusting in something that doesn't have value. And the only way to stop following a lie is to become acquainted with the truth. And who is truth? God is truth. And he's saying, hey, look, stop chasing this lie, stop pursuing this lie, and start pursuing God. He says, stop loving what's worthless and love that which is of supreme value. Because they had been loving what is worthless. He says, how long will you love what is worthless? Earlier, they had been loving what is worthless, and obviously that meant that they weren't loving God. And so he's like, look, get your hearts right. So he's already told them kind of get your minds right. Now he's telling them get your hearts right. And then I think David gives us a picture of what all of this dissension and all of this disunity and all of this friction he has caused for the people of the nation of Israel. Because, whenever there is division, whenever an antagonist attacks or stirs things up, there's always collateral damage. There's always the people who are not maybe directly involved, but who are watching it all unfold, who are affected by everything that's going on as well. We'll call that the audience of the antagonist. And here's what is going on in the nation of Israel. Notice what David says in verse 6. He says, many are asking, who can show us anything good? Let the light of your face shine on us, Lord. Many are asking, who can show us anything good? Listen, this is the attitude of the people. The division and dissension had created uncertainty and distrust, and the people were beginning to question David's leadership. They were beginning to question God's providence, and they were beginning to question the direction of the nation. And David is saying, God, they're asking, is there anything good? Nobody knows what to believe. anymore. And so he asks God, he says, let the light of your face shine on us, Lord. Listen, this is David's main request in this psalm, right? We've seen like his main beef was that these people were assaulting his character and stirring up problems. But his main request in this psalm is, Lord, let the light of your face shine on us. God, shine your light into this situation and remind people of who you are. Psalm 44, 1 through 8, David uses these exact words in that psalm as well. Psalm 44, 1 through 8, he talks about the light of God's face in that psalm as well. So let me read to you what he says there. He says, God, we have heard with our ears, our ancestors have told us the work you accomplished in their days. In days long ago, in order to plant them, you displaced the nations by your hand. In order to settle them, you brought disaster on the peoples. For they did not take the land by their sword. Their arm did not bring them victory, but by your right hand, your arm, and the light of your face, because you were favorable toward them. You are my king, my God, who ordains victories for Jacob. Through you we drive back our foes. Through your name we trample our enemies. For I do not trust in my bow, and my sword does not bring me victory. But you give us victory over our foes, and let those who hate us be disgraced. We boast in God all day long. We will praise your name forever. And so you notice there that he said that we didn't take the land by our sword, our arm did not bring victory, but by your right hand, your arm, and the light of your face. The light of God's face is a powerful thing because it dispels darkness and because it's representative of God's power in the presence of his people. And David is saying that the beneficial and righteous acts of God in the past is the foundation of our hope for the future. And so he's begging God, let the light of your face shine upon your people. That is the attitude and the request that he is asking. And now notice the last thing here, which is the assurance. And look at what he says. He says in verse 7, you have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and new wine abound. And so he's back to talking about these antagonists again. And he's saying, God, you've brought more joy into my life than any of these people who are coming against me, any of these powerful, prestigious, rich people, even in the greatest of their riches, when in all of their abundance and all of the gifts that they bring, none of that has brought me more joy than you. You have put more joy in my heart. And he says in verse 8, I will both lie down and sleep in peace, for you alone, Lord, make me live in safety. So look at the assurance here. First of all, he sees that God is the source of his joy, not material things and not people. He doesn't need those people, and he's not afraid of those people. And the next thing he says is that God is his source of peace. He says, I will both lie down and sleep in peace. Listen, you and I don't sleep when we don't feel peace. And I believe this may be part of why David went to God in the first place. He's lying in bed. He's thinking about all of this stuff. It's got him in turmoil, and he gives it to God. He voices all of this to God, and the burden is lifted, and now David feels immense peace, and he can sleep. Both lie down and sleep in peace, because God is his source of peace, and God is his source of security. For you alone, Lord, make me live in safety. This is why he can sleep in peace, is because he knows that ultimately God is the one who's in control. God guards his way. God guides his way. And so what's our takeaway here? Well, I would suggest to you that when you and I face our adversaries and our antagonists, we need to remind ourselves of the source of our joy, the source of our peace, and the source of our security. And then we need to trust the Lord to fight our battles, to vindicate us, and because he will. And, I've heard it said, you just keep doing what you know is right and let God take care of the rest. I've been told that before in my times when I felt like I was struggling against people who were discrediting me, who was trying to make me look bad. I've had people say this to me, and I have had times when I felt like the Spirit of God Himself was saying to me, you just keep doing what's right. You just keep serving me. You just keep being faithful to what I told you to do, and being where I've told you to be, and I will vindicate your name. I've had to outlast some antagonists, and I've done that through the grace of God. Okay, I've had people in my life who brought fierce opposition, and it was only because of God's Holy Spirit working in me that I was able to withstand those attacks and to just keep my head down and keep moving forward and doing what the Lord called me to do, and being who the Lord called me to be. And God brought me out on the other side. And I know you have those stories as well. So I would talk about, I would leave you with 4 kind of thoughts, I guess, in regards to antagonism and kind of what we learned today. And the first thing that I would say is this: true character can withstand character assaults. It's weak walls that are brought down by the fire of the enemy or the attack of the enemy. Strong walls can withstand. And true character, real character, godly character, integrity can withstand the character assaults of other people who wish to bring us down. Another thing I would say is this: truth is always more powerful than lies. So if you're on the side of truth, then regardless of the lies that other people spread, regardless of the lies that other people try to tell about you, just rest in the truth and know that the truth is stronger than lies, and that the truth always comes to the surface in the end. And another one is that transparency robs antagonists of their power. A lot of times, antagonists will lose their power when you bring something to the forefront that they would prefer stay behind the scenes. So if we just talk about, important things in front of everybody and be very transparent with what we're doing and who we are, a lot of times that robs antagonists of their power. Now, obviously, there's some things that you can't, some private issues that you can't talk about like that. But when it's possible, transparency always robs antagonists of their power. And then the last thing that I would say is this: a life that is rich in the Lord will never go bankrupt when discredited by the world. A life that is rich in the Lord will never go bankrupt when discredited by the world. Listen, as long as you're trusting the Lord, as long as you're looking to Him for your strength, as long as your life is firmly rooted in the Word of God, and you're living for Jesus, and you're drawing power from that relationship that you have with Jesus, then your life is not going to fall apart. The Holy Spirit is going to bind you and bear you and carry you through. A life that's rich in the Lord will never go bankrupt when discredited by the world. Hey, listen, I hope that this word's been encouraging to you today. I hope you've maybe taken away a few ideas about maybe how to deal with antagonists in your life. I think the Word of God is very practical in our lives and gives us good ideas about what we can do and how we can live for the Lord. So listen, I encourage you just to trust that the Lord will carry you through even when you're dealing with these kinds of things, and know that He's in control. Hey, have a great day, and I will catch up with you next time.